Really happy to welcome you to the Cooper-Hewitt Design Center. Just to tell you a little bit about why we are here at 111 Central Park North, we are what we're calling on the move at Cooper-Hewitt because we're in the midst of our most ambitious renovation ever. And we'll be reopening at 91st Street in spring of 2014 with 60% more gallery space. So we're super excited. But meanwhile, we want to make sure that you all keep us in your minds. So we've been popping up all over town, which many of you I'm sure know. We had a wonderful graphic design show that recently closed on Governor's Island. We have 4 shows traveling the nation and actually the world because we have a drawing show that just opened, a watercolor show that just opened in Paris last week. So look at our website and try to see every show. That's a traveling challenge. So the Cooper-Hewitt Design Center, we're thrilled to be here in Harlem, and if you look around, all of these cupboards were actually designed by high school students, along with Todd Oldham, who has really become the resident designer here, working with students of all ages. And his idea, since we're right north of Central Park, was to make this a veritable treehouse. So it really has that feel with the wooden paneling and the grass for the kids' library. We're really, really pleased with the turnout. We've got people coming from the community every day. And if the Cooper-Hewitt staff looks a little weary to you, that's because we're just concluding National Design Week. This is the 7th annual National Design Week, and we have something every day of the week. So it started last Saturday with family programs in this space, and it was completely packed, again with Todd Oldham, teaching kids how to make bags, which they will be using for their Halloween treats, I'm sure. And I just learned that we had almost 100 kids here today tie-dyeing, so if your chairs are a little bit dog-eared, that's why. Monday afternoon, we had a teen design fair for about 400 kids, learning about how wonderful a career in design can be. It's like speed dating, but they're talking to everybody in the design world, whether it's an industrial designer, a fashion designer, landscape designer. It's an amazing experience that I wish I had had when I was 17 years old. Monday night, we had the winners panel. So the 5 winners of the National Design Awards had a wonderful discussion about design and their careers. Tuesday morning, we had a Business of Design breakfast with CEOs and CMOs from different major companies, which will be online next week on the Cooper-Hewitt website. And then last night was our gala at Pier 60 for about 520 people, honoring the best in design. And, excuse me, National Design Week continues tomorrow with drop-in programs here, and Saturday with 2 family programs. So pass the word. We're sold out, but there's still room, is what I understand. Interesting conundrum. And they're all free, thanks to Target. And this space is also thanks to Target. So we're really, really thrilled to be here and to welcome you. And I am equally pleased to introduce to you our head of exhibitions and also the head of the staff's sustainability committee, Jocelyn Groom, who has taken sustainability really to heart. And it was her idea, actually, to have a lecture during National Design Week based on the sustainability theme. So I thank her very much for that. And it's something that we hope to make a permanent part of National Design Week. So please join me in welcoming Jocelyn, who will introduce Andrew.
Thank you, Caroline. As Caroline said, I'm Jocelyn. I'm the head of exhibitions and chair of our sustainability committee. And I just have a few kind of opening comments and then a short bio of Andrew, and then we'll get started with Andrew, so be patient. As you all know, this summer's weather was the hottest on record. More than 20,000 high-temperature records have been broken so far in the United States. Cities are heating up about twice as fast as the rest of the planet. Biblical rains, unending heat waves, savage swarms of tornadoes. What is going on? Solving issues of massive global climate change requires the participation of us all. And Andrew Revkin is here tonight to discuss how social media and communication design may help us save the planet. Speaking of communication, if you like this event, please like it, share it, or tweet it using the NDW hashtag, which is on the board over here. And that's also our website, cooperhewitt.org, to check out some of the programs that Caroline was describing to you. And I encourage you to sign up for our design news, which is at the kiosk that's right at the front door before you leave. Just quickly, I wanted to share some really incredible pictures. These are from the September issue of National Geographic, and I think they really beautifully frame some of the issues that Andrew is going to be describing. Whether or not you believe that climate change is caused by people, it's hard to deny from these pictures that something very dramatic is going on our planet. So this first slide is in 2010, and it was a thunderstorm in Montana. And this next slide is an unprecedented dust storm in Phoenix, and that was in 2011. Looks like a mountain descending on the city. And this is from Lake Geneva in Switzerland. It's frozen spray from a very severe cold spell. This was in 2012 of this year. And this is Texas, just southeast of Lubbock, Texas. This is taken this year. This is a cotton field that's unplanted because it's too dry. And this incredible shot is from China. This was a very severe storm, and this guy was caught in a parking garage, and he's trying to get up the stairs. So on that, I will just give a short bio of Andrew for you. Andrew Revkin is a very busy fellow. Since 1995, he has been a science reporter for the New York Times, and he's the creator of the .Earth blog. He's the author of books such as Global Warming, Understanding the Forecast, The North Pole Was Here, Puzzles and Perils at the Top of the World, and has an upcoming book, How to Fake a Moon Landing, Exposing the Myths of Science Denial. In his spare time, he performs in his band, Uncle Wade. He also writes about music, and one of his stories was made into a movie called Rockstar with Mark Wahlberg and Jennifer Aniston. He's currently Senior Fellow at the Pace Academy for Applied Environmental Sciences at Pace University, where he teaches communication. And his current focus is using web-based tools to create discussion around important issues related to balancing human affairs with the limits of our planet. So without further ado, Andrew, thank you.
It's great to be here. Just one tiny clarification. I no longer am a reporter at the Times. At the end of 2009, I moved to the op-ed side of the paper, where the .Earth blog was created as a news enterprise, but now it's part of the op-ed section. And I'm only on the website, so you can't find me in the printed paper these days. At least pretty rarely. So I'm going to talk about what I call noosphere, and everything you see in this picture will be explained in a little while. And as you can imagine, the last thing the world needs is a new word. iPhone, Google, we have plenty of words, but I'm going to actually reassure you by explaining that it's not a new word. It's just kind of a new spelling and a new conception of a very old word. And the pound sign has meaning as well. Well, if you know anything about Twitter, hashtags are a way to organize a conversation in the Twitterverse, or whatever you want to call it. And what I'm going to do is take you on a very quick journey. To some extent, my learning curve is I moved from conventional journalism, which I've done for 30 years. I started in magazines in the 80s, moved to the New York Times in the 90s, wrote 3 or 4 books, 3 books and change in between. Then I started to move on to the web through my blog and tweeting and everything. And so I've kind of seen it all when it comes to how you can communicate an idea. And while there's been a lot of woe is me and shame on you rhetoric for a long time, decades really, about the environment, I think we have to move beyond those shorthand ways of looking at these challenges. It's someone else's fault. That's the shame on you part. And woe is me is just the paralysis part. There's incredible opportunities now to shave away at big problems and to really make some breakthroughs that can make the world a better place. And a big chunk of the way forward is about communication. So just to give you a little taste of woe is me, the first few minutes I'm going to kind of take you down, and then I'm going to bring you back up. The down part is really crystallized by what happened in Copenhagen at the climate treaty talks in 2009. I've been covering this thing called global warming since the late 1980s. My first long article about the greenhouse effect was in 1988, and I was actually already writing about the atmosphere and humans and climate change in the mid-'80s. So I've kind of seen this story come and go and rise and fall in importance. And it really hit a wall, though, in Copenhagen. This was a photographer in the press room where we all lived for about 2 weeks, seemed like 2 years, covering what had been hoped to be a celebration. You know, Obama was in office. There was this Ban Ki-moon at the UN was saying, seal the deal, we'll finally have a treaty. And then the realities of trying to decarbonize a world where more than 80%, actually close to 90% of the world's energy still comes from fossil fuels. And China and India and the United States and other countries are still heavily dependent on these. The reality of that kind of created a wall there that really got a lot of people feeling like this photographer. And it's not, you know, again, the trajectories for the human experience on this planet the last couple of centuries have been in this sort of astonishing, vaulting shape to every curve. The curve for how much land is in agriculture, the curve for population, the curve for consumption of different resources. They all kind of look like this political cartoonist's effort from a few years back at articulating the challenge we have right now, which is we know that curve is going to change mid-century or so, and it's not going to get as high as it looks here. The 12 billion is almost inconceivable by mid-century. So it'd be more like 9 billion, but the question is, how do we feed, clothe, and get out of poverty populations that will have 2 billion more people than we have on the planet right now? And right now, there's 1 billion teenagers on planet Earth right now, just to give you a sense of just how many of us are out there and what a significant force we are. That alone, just 1 billion teenagers. In 1800, there were 1 billion people of all kinds, all ages. Now there's just 1 billion teenagers. So it's a big, feels kind of daunting. And then when you think about, suppose in 2050, when there's 9 billion of us, suppose that we all celebrate Black Friday by going to your local Target store or mall, and can you imagine 9 billion people doing this? It's not easy to imagine that, and to think that there's enough resources to produce the cotton and the energy and all the other things you would need to have that be the norm. So that says to me that even with technological advances, we're going to have to really look in the mirror a little bit. This relates to what I was saying about woe is me and shame on you. Too much of that stuff is not about actually self-examination and asking bigger questions like, what do I really need, and what do I want, and how much is enough? And so those are questions that are equally important with the questions about where do we get our energy from. So just keep that in mind as I go forward here. It's about values and goals, not just about technologies. So far, we've been kind of like bacteria on a plate of agar. I don't know if when you were in science courses as a kid, you smeared something on an agar in a petri dish. It kind of looks like that. And so far, that's kind of like us. There's resources, and we're growing. And scientists basically have been in the position of saying, hey, there's an edge to the petri dish. For the last 50 years or so, basically, that's a big chunk of the message that's come from climate scientists, ocean scientists, all the resource people who are studying depletion of the overuse of phosphorus, you name it. They're saying there are limits to these things, and yet we're growing as if they're not. And that creates a kind of a discordant thing. To me, the scientists in a position like that are kind of like the adult chiding the teenager who's come in late and was speeding and scraped the guardrail with the car. They're saying, hey, if you don't, they're wagging a finger and saying, if you don't do X, these things are going to run out. And on .earth, a number of times, since 2008, I've been articulating that our situation on the planet right now as a species, when you look at those trajectories, zoom, 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 grow, heedless inattention to resources, we're kind of like what we all were like when we went through puberty. The teenage kind of, at least the men in the room, testosterone fueled sort of look what I can do. That's been us for the last 200 years. And now scientists are kind of saying, hey, you've got to grow up. And that's never been an easy message for people to integrate as individuals or societies. And so I keep circling back to a wonderful movie from the 50s, Rebel Without a Cause. And there's a great scene when Jim Backus is trying to... So that's us, scientists are kind of, and we're like, no. And that's why I reject that this is all about big bad Exxon trying to sell us, some more fossil fuels. We've been just running through this stuff. So we have to kind of get some level of comfort with the fact that we're in a transition. We do need to modulate from kind of a sprint to more of a marathon pace. In fact, there's a piece on .earth from about 4 years ago with that title. Can we move from a sprint to a marathon pace? Can we sort of grow up, essentially? That's the challenge, and it's very different than the way things have been cast, I think, so far. Now, there's all kinds of other factors that are leading us to feel uncomfortable right now. For those of us who spent most of our life in the 20th century, I think most of us here, there might be one or two who have actually spent more than half of their lives in the 21st. But we grew up with guys like this, these silver-haired, old, avuncular guys saying, that's the way it is. Tuesday, whatever. They would hand you information. You didn't have to actually think. You could just absorb. You could read the New York Times. You could listen to Walter Cronkite. It was like the whole country was dining on the same comfort meals every night. In fact, it was at supper time. I remember in the 60s growing up, we literally would have our mac and cheese and be listening to Walter Cronkite. So, and now it's kind of like this, where if your issue is climate change, or if your issue is abortion, or your issue is healthcare, whatever, you go out there into this media environment, and you're still dining on comfort food. The problem is we're all eating different stuff. It's like the world's biggest food court. If you like sushi or Spanish or Tex-Mex, whatever, you can still find some information that suits your predispositions. So the web doesn't, I'm a big fan of the web. I think it's going to overall be a tremendous revolutionary tool for fostering progress on a finite planet. But for the moment, it's full of still noise, and everyone's in. It can actually make you more bubble-ish than you were before. Before you had a geographic bubble. You lived in the suburbs, or you lived in the city. You lived in a slum. And now we've actually can amplify all of that on the web by just going to our favorite restaurant equivalent of where we get our food. Whether it's Fox or the New York Times, NPR. Climate progress, if you're liberal. What's up with that if you're, doubtful or reject that greenhouse gases are important? .earth, climate.gov is a new government site that's really useful. But it's sort of, so what I try to teach at Pace University, the courses I teach there partially are about web literacy, it's actually a great thing in a way that Walter Cronkite doesn't exist anymore. I've met the guy when he was alive. He was wonderful, and I don't mean that it's good that he's dead, but I just mean it's good that we have to kind of grow up in our information skills, how to be more critical about how we think, why we think. And the critical thinking stuff has been conveyed too simply as just being skeptical. We have to actually somehow integrate into how we think, a little bit of thinking about how we're thinking and how we're feeling, because most of our reactions to, whether it's nuclear power or whether you're a vegan or a carnivore, those are not really usually rationally framed positions. They're more emotional than rational. So getting comfortable with that, understanding that a little bit is a part of how we move forward, I think. So, and that leads to this, I spent most of my first 25 years of writing about climate and biodiversity and all these issues really focused on biogeophysical questions. Greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere, some of them go back into the forest. How does that all work? What are the consequences? And then maybe 7 years ago, around 2005, I started writing more about the social sciences, which is, again, how do we receive information? What do we reject? What do we accept? What makes us change behavior? What kinds of information do that and what kinds don't? And there's this very rich and very depressing body of research which says, essentially, information doesn't matter very much. That, as David Ropeek, who teaches at Harvard, wrote a book called How Risky Is It Really? He said information is meaningless until it's framed or until it goes through your filters. And our filters are very powerful. Just to give you one example, this a post I did on .earth 2 or 3 years ago about the work at this website. There's a group based at Yale that do studies of what they call cultural cognition, basically how your cognitive appreciation of the world is largely filtered powerfully before it gets into your brain and makes you feel or do something. And so putting this in the context of climate change, I said, well, okay, let me see what this is like. And I went around and canvassed Nobel Prize winning physicists who've staked a position about global warming. And essentially, you can find a Nobel Prize winning physicist to suit your view of global warming. And what this says, and a lot of the work at this website says that more information doesn't change people. That actually more information makes you reinforce your position, your pre-existing position on issues like this. And that's why Robert Laughlin, Stephen Chu, Ivar Gaever, and Bert Richter, who's just on my blog today, have utterly, powerfully different views of the global warming problem or what you do about it. He's a big fan of nuclear. Steve Chu is a big fan of renewables and nuclear. He's kind of an all-of-the-above guy like Obama. Of course, he's the energy secretary for Obama. Ivar Gaever rejects the concept that there's the dangerous global warming. He feels it's been completely oversold, and Laughlin is kind of in the middle. So again, if you can get a Nobel Prize, so if you want to go into a debate, you can kind of pick one of these guys and say, well, Nobel Prize winning physicist so-and-so says, and that says to me, remember I spent all this time in journalism on the presumption that information matters. Why would I do this, what I do, if I didn't think that? I hit this wall of realizing it doesn't actually matter. Most of the time, people just use it to accomplish some goal they already had. And that's one of the things that led me out of full-time journalism. Not that I think it's a waste of time, but toward looking more fully at this pipeline. And my title at Pace University is Senior Fellow for Environmental Understanding, because I invented the title. They went along with that. Because I wanted to understand this whole concept and to work with students and ways to make the world better despite those realities. Now if you want to see a powerful example of how this plays out. Fukushima happened, right? Epic earthquake off the coast of Japan. Tsunami, nuclear power plant, hydrogen explosion, some radiation, an uninhabitable area, a bunch of reactors turned off, and now Japan's whole nuclear power system turned off for the time being. And two of the world's leading environmental writers, George Monbiot, who's in Britain, you may not have heard of him, but he is to England what Bill McKibben is to America. Very powerful, green guy. They wrote columns when this happened that were utterly divergent. Bill McKibben said, Fukushima illustrates the brittleness of nuclear power and why we have to turn off all these reactors and move to live smaller, live more local, put up some solar panels, and all will be well. George Monbiot said, because he cares so passionately about greenhouse gases, he says, this proves this is a robust technology. This plant still hasn't killed anybody. The low levels of radiation are unlikely actually to have a long-term impact. More people died from the stress of delocation than from any direct impact from the radiation, and it's the only way we're going to decarbonize a growing planet. So two green, with a capital G, people came away from this incident with utterly different conclusions. So I wrote a piece on .earth that put side by side these two guys' views and theses, and each one has elements that are true and powerful. But it says to me again, this is not just about convincing some Luddite fossil fuel fans and then once that's done, we'll have an easy path toward a brighter future. It's different than that. And just to take you, this is the last kind of part of the downward slide. And see, I'm still smiling, right? I've written a lot about disasters of all kinds, everything from 9/11 to earthquakes and tsunamis. And while I was covering aspects of the tsunami in Japan, I didn't go there, but I was writing about it. I learned about these stones that all the villages on that east coast of Honshu, of that island, I think it's Honshu, have markers, fairly far up from the shore, that were what they call tsunami stones. And I wrote about this because the etching on there says, high dwellings are the peace and harmony of our descendants. Remember the calamity of the great tsunamis. Do not build any homes below this point. So anyone who's wondering, why we haven't gotten the global warming problem, here's an illustration of why it's hard, because here, even in communities where you have this history for centuries of great waves devastating coastal communities, people still ended up building below the stones. So that says to me, these are deeper issues than we think they are. And I've been writing a lot about that ever since. So how can you then, knowing those things, what can you do with communication to foster more resilient living, to get us out of harm's way? What is it we're forgetting? In fact, the piece I did about this was under the headline of disaster memory. There's an anthropologist who studied this concept of disaster memory. It's just so interesting. There are elephant groups that I wrote about in 2008 that had really good disaster memory, but it was only the elders. The old female elephants knew where the water holes were, where you go when it's really dry. And what happened was through the 2000s, as hunters, ivory poachers were killing off all the elders, the elephants were just kind of wandering around. They didn't know where the water was, and they were having a higher mortality rate. So we have to listen to our elders, but we're really, we're not good at that either. So I did this piece in 2008. Are we stuck with what one reader called blah, 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 bang? Are we just stuck with that? Is that going to be our way forward as a species? And I don't think the answer is yes. But it could be if we're not attentive, if we're not thinking how we can teach, how we can learn, how we can become innovative and resilient, and just smarten up a little bit so we can avoid this sort of perpetual process of growing, hitting walls, and then retrenching. Because now that we're at a global scale, these like with greenhouse gases and loss of biodiversity, it's not like you can then say, oh, never mind, which might have been the case if you ruined a pond where you used to fish, then you could just move to the next one. But we don't have that leisure anymore. Whoops, sorry. So, and I think there are ways, I'm just going to throw this slide in as a way to illustrate. One thing we can do, I believe, is to design communication in ways that are fundamentally different. To think about, like, I'm sure if I did an exercise right now where I handed each of you a sheet of paper and you had 30 seconds to write down what you mean when you say global warming, there would be a lot of variations. The world is warming, the greenhouse effect, the disastrous destruction of the planet from X, a hoax or whatever. There would be, that probably isn't in this room, but there would be a range. And so what I try to do on .earth, I put this illustration up on the science, at least, to start to break it down into bite-sized chunks that we can all then agree on and clarify and then move forward in a conversation. Too many times I've seen people get into these big fights about global warming when they actually are talking about something entirely different. For one person, it's when they hear that word, Al Gore's face appears in their brain and their head explodes. That's, for some people, that's just what it is. For other people, it's something more subtle. And so until you clarify language, you can't move forward. So in other words, just to give you a quick sense of the science, more CO2 warming world is a very steep and powerful curve. If it were a bell curve, there's almost nobody out here and almost no one out there. Even Michael Crichton, the State of Fear author, wrote, he was a very skeptical guy when it came to climate change. I interviewed him in the mid-2000s, and he didn't disagree that greenhouse gases work and that they function. He had enough science background to know that. But he disagreed that it was the most important problem, that poverty and other issues didn't come first. But then here's what's really tough. With global warming, the things that matter most to people remain clouded by real uncertainty. This is not someone trying to dupe you into uncertainty. The pace of sea level rise, what's going to happen with hurricanes, regional climate forecasts are not going to get better anytime soon. The most powerful climate models in the world, the people who run them have said that for a long time. And how much warming we're going to get from more CO2. We still don't, that answer is kind of the same range of possibilities as it was 30 years ago, between like 2 and 7 degrees, meaning between manageable and catastrophe. But for too long, this was all portrayed as some single body of understanding that now we knew in a powerful way. There's nothing that we need to learn. And I think that empowered some people who didn't want anything to happen by saying, oh, look, you're overstating things. Because in fact, there was some oversimplification of the problem. Now, the same research I was talking to you about, the culture of cognition work, the work that gets at why people think the way they think, has provided some really interesting and important insights into how to get around some of these blockades. Now, I'll explain what this means for those in the back. There's a group at Yale, another unrelated group at Yale, do this periodic survey, what they call 6 Americas. If you just Google for that phrase, you'll find a lot of their work. And they found through deep surveys with Americans that there's essentially 6 kinds of Americans when it comes to this thing called global warming. And they range from alarmed to concerned, cautious, disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive. And they keep doing this survey periodically. And those bubbles have changed shape a little. Those are the proportions of those populations. This one's gotten smaller, this one's gotten bigger, this one, these are... So my hypothesis is that all the bubbles in the middle are kind of the same. People who just don't really, they're not engaged at all in this issue. And so that says, and we've been locked in that kind of framing for a long time. So in 2009, when this data was from, which was the year when the climate bill was being debated, to have a cap and trade system for CO2. That year, they asked these people, and the alarmed, et cetera, what do you think about cap and trade? And the midline here is maybe. This is yes and no. And they found that even the alarmed were just above maybe. So that said to me, anyone who thought that bill had a chance of passing was really, I don't know what they were smoking, but it was never going to happen. When you have the alarmed, either they didn't understand it or they really didn't have confidence that that was going to work. And the dismissives, of course, were very negative. So that says, this says you're going to hit a wall if this is your strategy for solving the climate problem. Now, they asked people some other questions, not about climate, but about energy. And here things got really interesting. Support for providing rebates for the purchase of solar panels and fuel-efficient vehicles. When you ask that question, even the dismissives, even the Tea Party hardy types were maybe. And everyone else is very far toward the yes. And that says to me, oh, that's interesting. That says that when you talk about energy, especially using it more efficiently, you can have a lot of consensus, even in a world that's paralyzed about global warming. So when I talk to economists about that, though, they say, oh, no, that's just what you're seeing there is the freebie effect. Basically, you're giving away stuff. It's a subsidy. And that's why everybody's for it. But then they asked another question, which really undercuts that idea. They asked, so would you support requiring, mandate? Think about Paul Ryan and the idea of requiring 45 mile per gallon fuel efficiency across vehicle fleets, even at $1,000 price premium. What a laden sentence that is. So you're asking people, would you support making cars more expensive as long as it would make them much more efficient? And even then, almost everybody is saying either kind of maybe yes or yes, and the dismissives are the only ones who are drifting down a little bit. So that says to me, boy, there was a lot of wasted wheel spinning several years ago, that fight over a climate bill, when we could have had a cogent discussion about energy intelligence, moving forward on using energy more efficiently, and unfortunately that opportunity for the time being got lost. So I wrote a piece at one point saying, if I had for my Prius, which still uses a significant amount of gasoline, if I had to choose between these bumper stickers, I would not do the one at the top. I would do the one at the bottom. And also, there's other reasons for that. When you look globally, there's parts of this planet, as I'll discuss in a minute, where they have no energy options at all. And for them, fossil fuels would be the best thing going. And I think it's more important for people in situations like that to have the fuel than to worry about what kind of light bulb to screw in. But we'll talk about that in a minute. So, I mentioned I've written about disasters, and my focus on this thing called noosphere and on the power of communication to make the world safer and better than it might otherwise be. A lot of this came through my reporting on earthquakes. I wrote about the 2008 disaster in Sichuan, that terrible earthquake. I didn't go there, but I was co-reporting with our China correspondents on what made all these schools fall down. This school killed those kids. And it was basically avoidable stuff. It was simple engineering failures. The flooring here was not tied in a way that was structurally sound. It was bound to be a death trap. So I'm thinking about this, and then I did a piece about how many millions of kids, when you look globally, are in earthquake zones with bad engineering. You realize when you add up those numbers, it's many millions of children who are going to school every day in death traps. And by the way, that's true in Oregon too. This is not just some poor, faraway places. There are 1,000 schools in the state of Oregon, I wrote about in 2008 and several times since, that are destined to collapse when that great Cascadia fault off the coast of Oregon finally moves. It hasn't done it in 300 years. Remember what I said about disaster memory? 300 years is a long time. There weren't any Americans, white, settled Western Americans here in Oregon in the year 1700. But they're due. They're due for that. And unlike California, California has enough kind of low-level seismicity that they stay pretty concerned about earthquake design. But in the states where it's a very rare but terrible shock, they're not. So I've been focused a lot on that stuff. And I found an engineer at Purdue University named Santiago Pujol, who I think is motivated to work on earthquakes because he comes from Colombia down in South America. He had come up with this really cool design where you take the same bricks and mortar and glass windows, the same materials that you would build a typical unsafe school with, and if you just change the configuration a little bit, you can make it fundamentally safer. So, and I wrote a Science Times article about that. We had some nice graphics. But then I talked to my older son, who's 20. Well, he was a sophomore at Pace. He's a communication major. He doesn't want to go into journalism. I kind of poisoned my kids on that idea. But he likes special effects. He wants to do special effects for the movies. So I said, Daniel, can you do an animated graphic to show what this safer design is like and why it doesn't take more costly materials? And so I basically, using the tools we have now, I could put together a earthquake engineer, a Pace sophomore, and me as a communicator and come up with this. So this is the problem. A lot of school buildings collapse, they pancake, and it's because they have weak vertical columns and big flat floors. And this is what it looks like. And so this is the typical design of a school. Whoa, sorry. And Daniel kind of shows you what happens. Those weak spots cause the columns to break. So then he runs it backwards. So we're going to play the earthquake over again. And now all you do is do that. If you just fill the bricks vertically all the way through one side, and this is a 3-story tall Purdue mock-up of a building on a shake table. This shows you that you can see there's more flexibility. That building is more apt to stay standing, and this shows you a nice, sustainable, aesthetic design using the principles. So it's not like you're building something that no one would want to live in or work in. So that potentiality is there right now. Young, innovative animators, illustrators, designers, and engineers and other scientists can get together, collaborate, and find ways to communicate without words. Remember, we're in the biggest building boom in the history of the human species. The next 30 years is going to see more structure, more square footage of structure built than has been built in all of history by some calculations. So if you can get out ahead of that and make sure people understand, put the bricks all over here and you have a safer building when your earthquake comes, that's a great opportunity. Doing it without words is even better. There's Roger Bilham is a seismologist at University of Colorado. He also has worked in quake zones in the Himalayas, and they've come up with these simple posters on how to mix cement, where three sand and one cement is good. That's bad. And you don't need the language, but and there's another subtle detail here. So the bad, this is a column with rebar, the steel bar, iron in it. You see there's just the vertical iron rods with nothing tying them together before they pour the cement around them. So just going back to, whoops, sorry, where am I here? Here you see, these are the ties. If you do that, you have a much more structurally rich building. This is what killed the kids in Sichuan, not having that. So you can do this stuff, and he's a very, very famed earthquake geologist. He doesn't need to be doing this stuff, but he's doing it because he cares. He's attentive to this issue. He knows, he's written papers about how many people are going to die when there's the next great Himalayan earthquake, and he wants to do something about it. So that you could build that into how his students are learning that their science is not just the technical issue, but what does it mean for people? It's really great. Whoops, I keep going the wrong way, sorry. So my earthquake reporting took me to Istanbul in 2009, where I went to a school. they were doing a drill, and this was a school that was retrofit. The World Bank came up with about $1 billion in loans for a bunch of schools and hospitals in Istanbul that are being retrofitted because that city is going to be hammered again. It's been hammered through history. In fact, there's a great art exhibition. There's a collector of earthquake art. He's in, his name is Kozak or something like that. He lives somewhere in Eastern Europe. And he has a collection of Istanbul. It's like woodcuts and prints and lithographs and photographs showing the history of earthquakes there. And they're going to have another one. So they're starting to get out ahead. I was there to write about all the things that are going on to try to limit the losses before the earthquake strikes. But then when you're a reporter in interesting places, like in a slum in Istanbul, you're like a kid magnet. I don't know how many of you spend time as a professional or whatever in developing countries, in poor places. Kids run up to you, and all these kids are, typically they'll just say American, or they'll try out some English words. They were saying Facebook, and that really struck me. This is 2009, and I went to their community center, and I saw that these kids, they were all playing, they don't have a computer at home, they're too poor, but they had 10 or so at this community center, and they were all playing Farmville, and I'm sure right now they're playing Minecraft, which is my 14-year-old son's favorite game. And and I realized, suddenly I was looking at, these kids and kids here are now playing together. Google is working really hard on translation interfaces, so they'll soon be able to play without the interference of language differences. We used to think that Esperanto, would all come to some common language. Now, because of these technologies, you don't need that anymore. You can keep your language, your culture, your richness, and still talk to people on the other side of the world. It's going to happen. It's happening now already, but it'll be smoother and smoother as time goes by. Very exciting. So a bunch of these kids now are my Facebook friends, which is really cool. It's not like I'm communicating with them every day, but it's fun to know they're out there. And now, when I was their age, it was this. How many people had a pen pal when they were a kid, of the older people in the room? You'd wait for weeks for the next crinkly envelope to come in. It was so special. Now it's still special to me, but it can be done with the click of a mouse. It's just completely seamless. You can have every school in America have a sister school in a developing country. It's possible now. It's happening in many places, and it's just such a great revolutionary way to increase our empathy, our sense of that we really are a global village, which seemed like such a hokey, fantastical concept a few decades ago. So this leads back to this word noosphere, which I said is not a new word. It derives from noosphere, which has a Greek root in the words planet of the mind. And there was a French theologian and a Russian geochemist who in the 30s and 1940s were closing in on this concept of that we were sheathing the planet essentially in intelligence. You could say it's not always intelligence, but in our consciousness, and that can be a force for a sustainable force for the planet in the long run. It's still an open question. Remember, we're in the early stages of it. There's a lot of turbulence, and we'll see how it plays out. But Darwin, I started fishing around, and I got back as far as Darwin in terms of someone articulating the same concept. In his other great book, The Descent of Man, he wrote a lot about tribal, our behaviors, our tribal nature. And he said that as we advance, our tribes will become increasingly linked. The simplest reason would tell each individual he ought to extend his social instincts and sympathies to all the members of the same nation. And then from that point forward, then it's not just nations, that we'll all be sort of interacting through global markets and through global relationships. And he said there's only an artificial barrier to prevent man's sympathies from extending to the men of all nations and races. And he took this further. He said, then come our relations with other species, that we'll have better relations with animals, and which is interesting as well. But here you see what's happening now is we're transcending the artificial barrier. Our communication technologies are taking that away. So that's why in a few decades, I think you'll see a much more of a real sense of global community. And again, the internet works in dark ways as well. It allowed the 9/11 guys to get together to find out where there's schools to train in flying planes into buildings and all that stuff. And of course, it allowed that horrible YouTube video to circulate and create violence and hatred. So and that gets me back to the notion of intentionality, like Roger Bilham, the seismologist. There is the potential to go into this communication arena and work. You have to work to make it work for good. But it will swamp it, to my mind. I think that side will swamp the downside. So I have this notion of this noosphere it's a network. It's a network of schools, libraries, businesses, orgs, and other institutions eager to collaborate, fostering a reasonable, sustainable, durable human journey on the planet. And that requires some resilience. It requires a lot of adaptability and ingenuity. It requires a lot of collaboration. But again, it's never been easier to collaborate than it is right now. To find someone who can do the thing you can't do, that's never been more possible than right now. So innovation, this is a remarkable invention. And it's an invention, just like photovoltaics were an invention. There's a guy named Messina, Richard, what's his first name? I think it was Richard Messina. He was at Mozilla. He was helping create Firefox. And way back in 2007, he proposed he tweeted this: how do you feel about using # for groups, as in Barcamp, which was programmers would get together to discuss issues, and that Barcamp is a term they used. So he found that, look, we have this way for stuff to flow that we call Twitter, and by having a word with this little code in front of it, that means that if you put that in your little search box on Twitter, like you put a term in Google, you can all talk to each other and have a cogent conversation, even though you're in completely different parts of the world, even though you might not be doing it at the same exact time, like you're not actually talking to each other. But so it's asynchronous and global. And it was an invention. And this kind of inventiveness has never been more possible. You can turn just a bunch of electrons can become an idea that can, I'm not going to say that this is going to change the world, but it's a way to organize that particular tool, Twitter, that's really revolutionary. And this is spread it's in Google Plus and other things as well. So this Twitterverse, whatever you want to call it, is a very noisy place. If you go, there's a website called, I think it's Twitter Map or something like that. You go there and it generates a map of what people are tweeting right now all around the world. And it's like, Justin Bieber, Justin Bieber, Justin Bieber, and all that stuff. So it's a soup. It seems like an incomprehensible soup, like meaningless crap. But again, using these tools and with intentionality, with goals, you can make that all make sense. NASA has dived into this arena of Twitter. They have a feed called Asteroid Watch. And one of the other big perils on this planet is someday we're going to get hit by a big asteroid or a meteor or meteorite. It's going to happen. It's happened all through Earth's history. It's probably not going to happen tomorrow, but I can't rule that out. And there's always rumors about this. You'll see some amateur astronomer in Australia will spot a rock and it'll get around the internet in a heartbeat that we have to evacuate Boston or something. And by getting into this arena, they are able to sort of create a zone of authority. If you go to follow us, when something bad is happening related to rocks in space, if you follow this, you'll have a path through all that stuff. They have about 1 million followers. My courses at Pace University now all have a hashtag. My blogging course, you guys can kind of take my blogging course, you're sort of participating in it in an indirect way, or actually in a direct way if you reply. My students are all tweeting all the time. Hopefully, it's part of their grade now. I want them out there. And there's what's today? Wednesday nights there's a WJ chat, WJCHAT. That's web journalism. It's a conversation every night about web journalism every week. There's one called Ag Chat, which is about farming, and Ed Chat, Ed Tech. There's communities, again, global communities that organize conversations where they're able to sort of convene and discuss and come away with talking, with to-do lists based on this simple tool. It's really cool. There's a University of Connecticut. There's a professor who teaches bird biology. She makes her students when they one of their assignments, standing assignment through the semester, is when they see a bird doing something interesting, they have to tweet about it, which of course is implicitly funny. And they include the bird class hashtag. So, and actually for the professors, it's really cool because it gives you a timestamp. You know who's doing what and when, because you can kind of track their performance through their tag. Now, of course, a big chunk of the world is not on the grid, and this is a terrible travesty. In Guinea, this is a photograph I've put on .earth several times. The slum outside the capital of Guinea has no electricity most of the time. So the kids, to do their homework, kids who are in school, who are motivated to go to school, improve their lives, get jobs, become part of a functioning global community, they have to go to the airport parking lot to do their homework, sit under the streetlights like they're moths. And it's a travesty. It's a crime to me that we live in a world where we're wondering about which light bulb to screw in. And of course, there's 2 billion people still with no light bulb at all, or a guttering kerosene lamp. Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General, wrote a really powerful essay about energy poverty, drawing on his own experience after the war, growing up where a candle was a very special thing. He was usually doing his homework by kerosene lamps, which are terrible, and the candles were reserved for nights when he had to really study hard, and that says a lot. But how much hasn't changed is terrible. So the the noosphere has not reached these kids. Of course, there's another issue here. They're all boys. That's the Nick Kristof issue. If you haven't read Half the Sky, I encourage you to, because we're not. And well, just think about Malala, the girl in Pakistan who got shot for seeking the right to go to school. It's the norm in many parts of struggling developing countries for girls, even if there aren't religious impediments to them going to school. There are other impediments for them not going to school. But that's a whole nother lecture. You could do a whole semester course on that photograph. But that's all changing in a heartbeat. This is the only wonky graph I think I have, and it's cell phone subscriptions around the world. So in 2000, there were about 700 million cell phones, and the blue is rich countries. So most of the cell phones in the world at that time were in rich countries. By 2005, more than half were in poorer countries. We're up to 2 billion now. This was 2010. I haven't gotten the new data, but it's over 5 billion cell phones. 3/4 of them are in poor places. And let me just show you what that means on the ground. Libby Rosenthal, a friend of mine at the paper, she went to Kenya in 2010 to a very remote part of Kenya, rural village, and she found the story of this woman who had a cell phone already. There's many parts of this world where people have cell phones, even though they don't have electricity yet. But what they do, they have to go into town to recharge it, or it's at a very high rate for the electricity. And it's, that's burdensome. And the cell phone is a lifeline. As you know, if you've been tracking, your cell phone in most developing countries now is your bank. That's how you bank. It's how you do virtually everything. So it's a vital thing. It's the way farmers get their crop price, so they know which market to go to. All kinds. It's transformative. But she said she got tired of going into town once a week to recharge her cell phone, so she saved up money and she bought this little solar panel to put on her mud hut, and she started charging her phone at home. She had enough electricity left over. She started selling charging time to her neighbors, so she set up a business. She was making money charging her neighbors' cell phones, and her kids, remember, the kids in this city in Guinea don't have light. Her kids in this hut had a bright LED lamp to do their homework by. And she was saying to the reporter that they were already doing better in school, all kinds of better outcomes. You can do work at night that you couldn't have done without that. And then the only downside she found was her neighbors got so excited by this, they started saving up money and buying their own little solar panels. And so her business kind of ended. But that says, what a transformative potential when you have a portal for information and a little dribble of electricity. You can have a world-changing mix. And it's so exciting to see that going on. And here, this is really interesting. So that's all just telephones and maybe some tweeting. But so you think, why am I showing the World Cup? Well, when the World Cup was coming to South Africa, something else came with it as well. Some private investors said, hey, we're not going to have enough bandwidth down in all these South African cities to broadcast the games in high definition to the rest of the world. So they said, let's lay a cable, an undersea fiber optic cable. And there's a company called Seacom, S-E-A-C-O-M, that was formed to do this. And they laid a cable up the east coast of Africa, from South Africa to Europe. And it was privately invested, all African, 3/4 African capital, and no World Bank-y kind of project. It was money-making. And the cable, what they found was after the World Cup was over, then they had all this excess bandwidth, and all the countries along the east coast of the eastern coast of Africa are tying into that cable. This is Tanzania tying into that offshore fiber optic cable, and so the price of internet access in those parts of Africa is plunging. So go to ccom.mu if you want to learn more. It's really pretty cool, and they're laying other cables. It's kind of like, it's literally the world being wired. You think about, most of this being satellite kind of stuff, but there's a lot of this as well. It's remarkable. And this is transforming the potential again in so many arenas, not just science and engineering, but here in just simple classroom stuff. This is a network of schools that was created by some young people who went around the Atlantic couple years ago, doing these little programs for kids in coastal communities. It's called AtlanticRising.org. And it's a program on sea level rise and vulnerability in coastal communities. And these young educators from England went all around the Atlantic. So you're talking about Ghana, Scotland, Nantucket, and they did these workshops. And a lot of those kids are now talking to each other on Skype. So they're realizing they have common issues, that even though they're separated by thousands of miles of ocean, they have real issues because they live on coasts. And I think that's a really cool example. And of course, this can all operate as an extension service. One of the big revolutions in this country in the 1800s was that we had ways to teach farmers how to use better practices to avoid erosion. And that concept now can be global in a heartbeat. Think about, the farmers are all on cell phones. So the potential the yield gap, Google for yield gap if you want to learn about the opportunities that we have right now to better the lives of poor people in agricultural zones. There are farmers in the United States who growing chickpeas at like 7 tons per hectare, where it's 1 ton per hectare in parts of Africa. So if you can even bring that up to 2 or 3 through different practices, through a little more fertilizer, through other breeds of seed and that kind of thing, you're talking about greatly easing that burden of, remember the train going up the slope, making things more possible. A lot of this is really like Match.com. The potential I see is over and over again about getting the right idea to the right place at the right time, or getting two people with good ideas that don't really work together unless they're together, getting them together, like my son and the engineer. And there's lots of experiments underway. Design the other, this program is related to what Cooper-Hewitt has been promoting in some of its exhibitions. Design for the other 90%. That's to encourage architects and designers to think about the people who aren't driving Porsches, at least some of the time. And Scientists Without Borders is a New York Academy of Sciences effort to sort of create a hub for scientists and problems to get together. There's, of course, great opportunities. This is a profit-making version of the same thing. Hey, I've got something I need. I'm a company and I need someone to do something. Who can do it? And then you get paid for that. So it's a great. And then there's Kickstarter. Has anyone actually supported something on Kickstarter? I have. It's amazing. Where you want to create a film about water problems in slums in southern India, you can put it out there, show a couple examples of your work, and raise a few $1,000s and get it done. I mean, that wasn't. In the old days, you had to write some grant proposal for 10 foundations, 9 of which would, or 10 would say thank you but no, and so it's revolutionizing even the way we raise money. And then think of this. I was at the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences meeting a couple of years ago. They had a session on what science teachers need. Overworked, under-budgeted science teachers, one of the things they said they needed is little 1-minute videos, like little explanatory animated things about momentum or about greenhouse gases or whatever. They don't need, epic 5-hour Discovery Channel documentaries. They need these little bits, and then they can build a lecture around that. So busy science teacher seeks. And then again, young people can provide. And there's this concept called geoengineering, which is if we really screw up and it turns out global warming is at the high end, and our backs are to the wall, we're going to want to throw something into the atmosphere to make the planet cooler in the face of all the stuff we're throwing into the atmosphere that's making it warmer. Geoengineering. So these students in California a couple of years ago did this little explainer.
A closer look at geoengineering. What is geoengineering? Well, geoengineering is something global, intentional, and unnatural. And we've got some smart fellers figuring out new methods. Let's look at a few. Space mirrors. In this lifelike reenactment, Eric is the sun and Patrick is the earth. As Patrick orbits Eric, he receives some of Eric's solar radiation, making Patrick very warm. Let's see what Patrick has up his sleeve. By deploying space mirrors,
There we go.
Patrick deflects some of Eric's warming radiation, making himself comfortably cool.
You get the idea. So here's another one from NYU. This explainer.net is a journalism project there. So you get the idea. And what I liked about that particular piece is it has a feel of something that's kind of urgent and negative, but when it gets to the end, it basically says, we don't know enough about this technology. We need to know more, which is a fundamental, which is the reality, that there's gaps in understanding, and that's why there's a lot of divisiveness over what to do. And then the power to do stuff yourself, DIY, has never been greater. There was a guy several years ago with all the drilling going on in Pennsylvania. He realized that a lot of the data on wells, and permits, and violations was all public, but no one had actually put it on a map. So he said it took like a day or two to create fractrack.org, which is a website where if you're going to move there, or if you're trying to sell your house or whatever, and you wanted to kind of get a clear sense of what's going on around you, you click on one of these little buttons, and you have a lot of detail, permits, violations, waste, production. So, and this was done, by, he's not a software engineer. He just dove in, found the tools, and did it. And I think that shows you, again, the potential to play a meaningful role, especially in a world of limited budgets. We all expect government has to be the person that's the entity that's keeping control of this information. But we're in a post, information is out there, transparency is increasing over and over again, whether it's through all the different means you've seen for information will be free in the end. And I think this shows you great potential to get kind of do it yourself. Showing and telling. I mean, this goes way back. Gets back to the reality of what I'm talking about is not technology or really communication technology issue. It's an intentionality issue. It's like, what do I want to communicate? What do I want to get done with that? And what's the best tool for it? So I could tell you the volume of the atmosphere at sea level pressure. It's a certain number of million cubic kilometers. Or I can show you. And Adam Neiman, a very talented science illustrator, created this a few years back. That's the volume of all the air in the atmosphere if you put it in a spherical shape at sea level pressure. And it says something to me that's much more powerful than telling you a number. And this is this is the oceans. Actually, that's all the world's liquid water. That's it. So it's a great starting point for a conversation about commons, these shared assets that are finite, to start with something like this. And then you can tell your class, hey class, all right, so this is all the world's water, but tell me, I want you to go home tonight and draw the size of a sphere for all the world's potable water, or just fresh water. And you realize, then they'd come back the next day and realize it would be too small to see. And that too has power. It says, that's a very precious thing, fresh water. You can choose your wavelength. Like this is Colorado, sunny day. I'm just going to back up so you can see it again. All right, oil tank, Colorado, sunny day. This is the same oil tank, same day. This is infrared camera. It shows you the escaping methane. And I wrote about this page one story in the New York Times 2009, all the methane, all that natural gas that's escaping routinely from installations across the country that can be captured by cleaner processes, held in, and then you have a valuable fuel. So, and if you let it go, it's a powerful greenhouse gas. But so choose the wavelength, choose the design, choose the means of communication with the end in mind, and you have better outcomes. And Randy Olson, who's he wrote a book called "Don't Be Such a Scientist," about communicating science, and he has this phrase, the nerd loop. Too much of our conversations lately about things like climate have been just us talking to each other. How do we communicate better, as opposed to just trying stuff. And these are some scientists who've tried stuff on .Earth, which is really fun. Now, I'm going to show you one last thing, which is that virtually everything I've told you about so far has been kind of virtual, just to repeat the word. It's been data-driven or involving tools and technologies. But a chunk of what has to also happen in the next generation or so is a re-engagement with the wet, dirty, cold, muddy, rich part of our planet. And so a few years back, my younger son and I were rowing up a little channel in Florida near where my parents live, in a kind of a very overbuilt area of Florida. But there was still this little fragment of mangroves, and Jack made a little video.
Well, that was weird. This looked like a statue. Yeah. I was trying to color a heron.
We had seen these herons in there the day before, and he wanted to see if he could get some video of them.
Babies. Oh, yes, there. Move back.
Remember that sound.
There's someone. Move over, I can't see it.
Get out of the way, Dad.
Yes. That's a baby tricolor heron. They are cute.
So what's really cool about that is, of course, it was an electrifying experience for him to see the bird and to capture it on video. But then he put it on YouTube, and so this is what I call this a hybrid experience. We think of our kids, we want to get these tools out of their hands. Like the professor at University of Connecticut said her students have never been more engaged in watching bird behavior than they have been since she's required them to tweet about it. So finding opportunities for a hybrid experience where the kid is getting wet and or seeing a remarkable bird and sharing the information. Again, as we've never had more capability to do that, I think you can have unparalleled potential to, again, have better outcomes on this planet. And that's my story for tonight. That's us. This was that 1990 Voyager image, and that's the furthest Earth has ever been observed by humans. And that's me. So I'm easy to find. Thank you. And if we have time, I could, answer a few questions.
Yeah, we have just a few minutes, so we can take a couple questions, and I'll bring the mic to you.
You alluded to the type of efforts, the Copenhagen disaster, et cetera, and the effort to change the light bulbs that people use. Do you feel at the end of the day, at this time, with the way the country is, that doing something like that is a negative because it just angers, upsets, frustrates people who could have been more engaged by something else, such as the increased mileage get on cars?
I'm not sure completely understand, but the fight to get a climate bill, I think, was damaging, because now it's going to be much, much harder than it might have been to have a more modest approach at the beginning. And even Joe Rahm at this sort of aggressively activist climate site, Climate Progress, he said a few years ago, the thing we need to do is get started. We need some price on carbon, not a high price on carbon at the beginning. But 3 or 4 years ago, no one was saying that. It had to be an ironclad thing, no nuclear. A terrible thing happened in 2003. The environmental movement bailed on John McCain. When he was a senator, McCain and Lieberman had this bill that had some elements that were favorable to the nuclear power industry. And when that happened, NRDC and all the other environmental groups bailed on him. They said, we're not going to support the bill. And that struck me as just the wrong thing to do. I remember I ran into the head of EDF in Washington, D.C., like on a street corner. I said, what's going on? And it's because of, for a big chunk of the environmental community, nuclear is still a no-go zone, so you can't even talk about it. So they lost these big opportunities at that time to have some movement when there was more bipartisanship, and now we're sort of really up against it. So I think it is tougher right now. I do think there's roads forward, but it's going to take time. It's going to take time. And by the way, in Europe, we think of Europe as being more further along the line, but they're not really. When you look at the carbon accounting, not just because of the recession, but because of the shift from coal to natural gas, our emissions of greenhouse gases are now back to where they were in 1992. And Europe right now, they're moving to coal again in Germany because they're turning off their nuclear power plants and they don't want to have fracking. So it's like, come on, guys. Anyway, is there another one?
So, sorry, you spoke about the web being this incredible tool for progress and innovation, but you also brought up some examples of times where it has also been used for bad. And I'm just wondering if you think if this is always a mixed bag, or if there's some way that we can streamline or put some kind of control or harness this incredible potential for good.
I don't think you can control the web. It's going to be an open source medium. People will be able to do bad things with the same ease you can do good things. But I think if cultures kind of build a kind of sense, a common sense of the potential for this resource to do good stuff, like getting the farmers in Africa to have a fairer price for their corn, is at a fundamentally richer level than someone sending a YouTube around, a destructive YouTube video. And so I think on that scale, that the potential to do good with these media will swamp the bad stuff. But I can't prove that to you. It's an article of faith. It's a faith thing. I think if we all work at it, if schools and teach students how to be civil on the web and to use it as a tool to not just say where what shop you're going to at the mall, that it can really be powerful.
I didn't quite understand. I think you showed a picture of an oil well, and you were saying gases were escaping. Was that an oil well?
Oh, it's that's a methane, which is the main ingredient in natural gas as well. Also comes out of oil. When oil's been pumped out of the ground, it's degassing. Methane comes out of that oil. And
after you blogged on that, what sort of industrial response did you find to that information? Well,
it's been interesting. So, the industry. This was 2009. This was before the Gulf spill. And BP actually was a leader in tightening its facilities to end those kinds of leaks. BP, I wrote a big piece, focused a little bit on BP and what they were doing to foster a corporate culture that leaks are bad, that this is our product, natural gas. We need to keep it in the pipelines and sell it to people to burn as a clean fuel, not let it escape into the air. So it was at BP and some other companies, they really did a good job of essentially eliminating those emissions, but other companies the culture is It's an easier sell within the average oil gas company to drill a new well than to fix the old one. And so there's a culture change that has to happen. But that's the same culture change that I'm talking about on every front, whether it's turning out the lights, in rooms when you leave them. We just are still not a culture that's attuned to having energy. The energy quest is also about a quest for efficiency as well, making sure you're not wasting it.
So many Americans in the recession have had to make do with less and make more of what we have, that surely there must be some sort of tide change happening in public opinion about that kind of thing.
Well, the best metric of that is sales of Priuses and vehicle miles driven per person. And you see a very consistent, energy prices go up, gas prices go up, Prius sales go up, miles driven goes down. And I wrote a piece about, there was a period, it was during the recession when, for the first time in decades, the vehicle miles driven went down, and everyone's saying, see, finally we're there. But that also happened in the 70s during the oil crisis, and then it was like up, 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 up. And when you see oil prices go down, then everyone just starts driving again, and the Prius sales go down. It's just, so this gets some of this, well, that's why it's great. Obama and the debate, the one, I credited him on the blog the other day for, he was talking, he joined the drill fest there with Romney. We all have to drill, but he did say that alone is not, that doesn't solve our problem. We have to cut our demand. We're doubling vehicle efficiency, blah, blah. Thank God he slipped that in there, because otherwise, really was pretty dire. But again, vehicle efficiency, there's ways to, you can mandate some of that stuff, and people are okay with that, as you saw from those surveys.
Hi, so if we want to try and move the needle and for good, what do you think? What are your top 3, top 5? What are the most important things that we could do, whether it be as individuals or collectively as organizations?
Well, as individuals and families, particularly as families, just fostering a culture of examining what's enough. Do we really need another shirt, or do we, how frequently do you go to the next iPod or iPad? Those issues matter, that sense of just examining sufficiency, what's enough, making sure that kids grow up with a richer sense of that than what's imposed on them through advertising and through that competitive thing. And, and these are deeper issues than passing our climate bill. But they're really important. I wrote a piece in 2005 about gross national happiness, this concept in Bhutan of having new ways to measure success, and unless and until we, as individuals and societies, shift how we measure success. GDP doesn't tell you about everybody's quality of life. It just tells you about overall growth of the economy, finding other metrics. The things you measure are the things that shape how you behave to some extent. So I think we have to work to shift some of those norms. And there are people, even at the Census Bureau in Commerce, Census, one of those places. In that piece in 2005, there are people within the bureaucracy who are trying to kind of come up with a new basket of indicators. So it isn't just GDP. Congress didn't want to give them the money for it, though. So there's work to be done. And I don't really see, I could tell you a 3-point plan, obviously using less stuff, eating less meat, thinking about energy when you drive, trip chaining, if you have to use a car, use it efficiently. If all those kinds of things matter, but they don't matter as much as making sure your school where your kids are learning is focused on ingenuity, innovation, teaching that failure is okay, because if you're not going to have breakthroughs if you're not failing, and that all those things are hard too. But that's, I think, where there's real promise. And then connectivity, making sure your kid, as I was saying, the potential to have your kid be in touch with kids in Botswana or Bali is unparalleled. There's ways to figure that out. Have them sort of explore, do a Dora the Explorer thing that ends with them finding a kid in Thailand on Facebook or something. That stuff, I think, matters.
I think we have time for one more question. Okay, two more.
Hi, I'm a graphic designer, and I'm working on a corporate social responsibility report right now for a company that provides energy by combusting waste. And I was wondering, like, I'm learning a lot about the process just through this report, and that's the first that I really learned about it, and I was wondering what your thoughts on that were.
On burning waste for energy? I think we lost some big opportunities in this country to do that. When I was in Seoul, South Korea a few years ago, in Scandinavia, one of the most environmentally conscious countries, they routinely turn trash to energy, waste to energy. And they do it cleanly. They don't worry about the emissions because there aren't any that are substantive. Here, though, we've really, it's like this issue that Tom Friedman and others have talked about. We moved from NIMBY to banana being build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. And NIMBY was not in my backyard, but now it's impossible to get certain things done now. And New York rejected incineration. All of our waste goes in trucks, hundreds and hundreds of trucks, polluting poor neighborhoods in the city, and because we won't incinerate our trash here. And there are real issues with social justice and where you put it, but we haven't really, there's so many opportunities to look in a new way at our resources and our waste and figure out how to be more systemic about it. And some of that's very un-American, unfortunately. Like in Copenhagen, all their waste heat, they're incredibly good at using waste heat, like from one building and turning it into something else. And we just don't think systemically. It actually is kind of un-American in a way. Regional Planning Association in this region, I've written about, I don't know how many studies of theirs I wrote about when I was a Metro reporter. And it's like, but we just don't think regionally. We don't, we're always, I don't know, it's tough. But there's a lot of promise there. But there also would be impediments depending on where it's done.
One more.
So I thought it was interesting that you spent most of the lecture talking about all these issues it seemed like most of the issues have to do with like politics and like policy and things of that sort. But you didn't talk much about like cities and buildings and because that's part of the equation too. And I wanted to know if that is a function of just your interest or that maybe the way cities are planned, the way we build buildings don't matter quite as much, and that it's more about policy and like relationships between different countries. And
making sure developing countries' cities remain functional is like one of the biggest priorities that exists. Cities are vitally important right now, and they can be a great way to soften our impact on the overall biosphere, to do things more efficiently. People who move to cities end up with lower fertility rates, quicker access to education, more health care than people in rural areas. So the urbanization of the human species is probably one of the biggest boons to our prospects for having a decent ride in this century that exists. But that's a whole nother, I could do a whole nother talk on it. You're right, I glossed over it, because I'm focusing here on communication. And New York City is doing remarkable things that can go much further in terms of efficiency and using, the million trees, plant a million trees thing. There's a iTree software or something. One of my graduate students was working on this. And you could actually have every community right now the schools could adopt the trees in their neighborhood. The trees are all like GIS tagged, geotagged, and they know everything about each tree. You could have, there's great ways to use information within cities that make efficiency and sort of an awareness of the value of living stuff higher, that kind of thing. So, I don't know. Yes, the answer is cities matter hugely, including this one.
Okay, I think that concludes the program. Thank you. Let's give a big round of applause again to Andrew.
Thank you.
Great talk.
Thanks. And do visit the blog, and I'm easy to find, so if you have any questions, follow up.